Hello there and welcome to AM Prime on WESN Content Capital. I'm Keaton Shaw. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. We're continuing our conversations leading to budget for the fiscal year 2023-2024, and I am joined this morning, Derek Ramsmouge, who is my co-host for the next week and a half at least. We are both joined this morning by former Minister in the Ministry of Finance, Mariano Brown. Good morning, sir, and welcome to the program.
Good morning. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. Derek, good to see you once more.
Good morning, Mr. Brown.
Good
How are
morning,
you keeping?
Yeah,
It's been a long time. Glad and happy to see you here.
Yeah. Well, thanks for inviting me again.
Well, Derek, in the conversations for which we ended yesterday, we spoke a lot about restructuring the economy and whether or not such restructuring would be accepted. But Mr. Brown is here to speak to us today about considerations when formulating a budget. And we're speaking specifically about the national economy of Trinidad and Tobago, especially with the considerations for 2023-2024. Mr. Brown, there's so many considerations to get into, but in your opinion, in your expert opinion, what are the most prominent considerations, especially for Trinidad and Tobago?
I mean, a budget statement is just that. It's a statement of revenue and expenditure. And there are always more claims for greater expenditure than there is the capacity to finance them. And one of the difficulties that we face is that a substantial part of our economy revolves around the dynamo of the energy sector. Right? Now, recently we have reconsidered 2017. We changed the calculation of where the petrochemical sector is, the value added that comes from the creation of ammonia, methanol, urea. That normally was kept and shown as part of your part of your energy sector. Now that's been split off, and that is shown as part of manufacturing. So when the Minister of Finance speaks about manufacturing, most people think of manufacturing as local manufacturing, domestic manufacturing, import, export. For example, soft drinks, beverages, clothes, those type of things. That now includes the petrochemical sector. And the petrochemical sector has had some mixed fortunes over the last, for the last 10 years. The underlying problem has been the production of natural gas has been declining. So we've moved from 4.2 billion cubic feet a day in 2010, 2011. And that's our highest point. And we're now producing at roughly an average of 2.6 a day. Right? The beginning of the year, we were 2.7. The last statistics that were published show us at 2.5, which I think is about June, 2.5, just under 2.6. So that what has happened is that we're in secular decline. Now to convert it, to give some sort of comparison to where we are relative, for example, to Guyana, because Guyana is sort of the new kid on the block. It takes about 6,000 cubic feet of natural gas to give you 1 barrel of oil equivalent. So in real terms, the total volume of product coming from natural gas in oil terms, in oil dollar terms, a barrel of oil is about 450,000 barrels. Now, Guyana is producing that on a daily basis, and they're going to move towards 1 million barrels over the next 2 years, 2 to 3 years. So their production is ramping up, and our production is coming down. We're coming down from a high of just about 850,000 barrels a day in terms of barrel oil equivalents. Now, so that's just to give you a comparison. So if we look at it in terms of what is required, install plant capacity in the petrochemical sector. And Trinidad is a gas economy. It's not an oil economy. It's a gas economy. And we've been a gas economy roughly since 1979. So the volume of production of natural gas matters and makes a difference. Trinidad and Tobago's economy expanded when we expanded the export of natural gas in the form of alternative hydrocarbons, ammonia, urea, methanol. And then when we introduced LNG. So what we did is that we knew the amount of gas product we had, But what we did is we sort of increased the amount of output relative to the supply. What has happened now is that the supply is dwindling, so therefore the amount we have exported is now declining. And that is really what has been responsible for the topsy-turvy nature of our growth cycle and the fact that we've been running a number of fiscal deficits. If we had to look back over the last 15 years, in terms of what you would call the budget, we've had about 13 of those 15 years have been deficits. Right? Last year has been an exception where we had a surplus. Now, where did the surplus come from? Well, what happened was we had when the economies closed down for COVID and then they reopened, there was a surge in demand for natural gas, for energy products generally, so that the prices went up. And the prices of ammonia went from something about $200 a ton, somewhere thereabouts, to as high as $1,500 a ton. So that's 7 times the price. All right? So somewhere between 5 and 7 times the price. And as a result, Trinidad and Tobago's economy grew in 2021 and 2022. And the other influence was the impact of the war in Ukraine. All right? That also pushed up demand. So that we did well in 2021 and 2022. In fact, the economy grew. We came out of a slump, which was between 2015 to 2020, and COVID also made that worse. So the economy was heading in this direction, and as a result, government revenue also went in that direction. So we moved from, say, a budget under the UNC in 2015 of about $58, $59 billion, with an expenditure which was equivalent. In fact, the expenditure was greater than the revenue in those days. So if the revenue was 58, expenditure was 60. So we had deficits then too. And then all of a sudden in 2015, revenue crashed, so that the actual earnings went down to something in the region of about $36, $40 billion. And the expenditure remained at around 50. So there was a sizable deficit between 2015, 16, 17, 18. And when there was some improvement, and then we found ourselves in a situation where Juniper and Angeline came on stream, and we moved the production of natural gas up to 3.6, but now we are at 2.6 on average. That's $1 billion difference. So it means that we are 40% away from our high, and we're 25% away from a lower figure of 3.6 billion. So things are tight in the petrochemical sector, and that's one of the reasons why Train 1 is closed. There's no gas for Train 1. And that's the reason why government has been concentrating on Manatee and Dragon. Mm-hmm. And Dragon is in Venezuela waters. So there are you can distinguish between 2 types of gas, what they call cross-border gas, meaning that the field lies between Trinidad and Venezuela, and you have to, a piece of it belongs to us, a piece of us belongs to them. The smaller piece belongs to us. We only own about 25 or 26% of the field. So that's what's being developed for Shell, and that's in the south part of the country in terms of where the fields are. And Dragon, which is across the border. So it means that's in Venezuela waters. So we need Venezuela's permission to access that. And that's one of the reasons why they've had these conversations. These conversations and agreements have been ongoing for about 10 years. So the reality is that we don't have any agreement to get at what you call Venezuela gas. So there are talks about Dragon, but no deal. How does that relate to our situation? Well, the reality is that the government's revenue profile is going to be under stress. In other words, if they were able to get about $57 million last year, $56 million last year in revenue, we're probably going to be less than that, somewhere around 50 billion. You know, rough numbers. I don't have access to the numbers, so I don't know what the numbers are, but I know it's going to be less. Right? I mean, that's a fact. So where's the expenditure? Well, the expenditure last year was about 57, or projected at 57. Now, that still means that you're going to, and it has been admitted that 23 is going to be a deficit, and 23 would have been a growth year in terms of GDP. So there would have been still some increase in the revenue. So where's the minister now? Well, I'm supposed to have $56 billion last year. I'm not going to have $56 billion last year. But the requirements in terms of expenditure are going to still be about 57 plus. And what happens when inflation goes up? Inflation affects government the same way it affects you. The same way people are complaining that food prices and the cost of living is going up. Well, everything that government buys, it buys in the same marketplace. So that there's a natural increase in their expenditure. Right? And if you consider that they've been coming to an agreement with the unions with respect to a negotiating cycle, which is actually 9 years. They haven't had an agreement since 2013. So we're talking about 2013 to the current day is 9-10 years. So that has to have some element of back pay, which is going to push up the expenditure profile. So the minister is in a pretty difficult position where how am I going to meet all the requirements, all the new claims on government revenue and to satisfy the public. It's a difficult position to be in. Now, how government builds its budget, it starts in March. When we have the mid-year budget review,
yes.
Right, well then there's what is called a call, which goes out to all the ministries, which gives them some directions in terms of projections for the next year. So literally, the period March to August is really about refining what those numbers look like, what comes back in from the various ministries. You add it all up, and then you realize, well, okay, well, everybody wants, this is what they want to spend. Right? What are my projections for income? Right? And on that basis, well, okay, what projects did we agree in cabinet? What projects that were announced? And the question now becomes, what projects can we really finance? Right? So what gets into the budget as a priority? Now, that is really where the rubber hits the road. Now, a lot of that work is done in the background. You get different recommendations which comes from the private sector about what they think should happen. Invariably, all the measures are really on the fiscal side, meaning what you should tax and what you shouldn't tax. And every time the minister has to fiddle with the taxation position, he's in fact fiddling with the revenue position. So how much revenue I'm going to have, how much revenue I'm going to give away. And in the meantime, we have these listed demands for new expenditure. Right? So somewhere in the back room, well, okay, well, can you really do this project next year? Should we postpone that project? How do we, should we do it over a year or two rather than do it in 1 year? Right? Now, those are the kinds of calculations, meetings that take place. The minister meets with the various ministers and their technical teams as to what they want for the next year. So all this is done in advance. And afterwards, so we have some idea about the revenue estimates, and they kind of come to some conclusion about the revenue estimates and the expenditure. All right? The focus would be more on the expenditure side. The revenue is the one that's fungible, right? Because that really depends upon what's taking place in the energy sector, what's taking place in the international market. That's going to determine what my revenue looks like. So they have a much better feel in terms of what expenditure is going to happen, and that's really where the really numbers start. So what do I do with the revenue number? Now that's one exercise. The second part of that exercise is how do I communicate it to the public? And that's the budget speech. Mm-hmm. So that budget speech is really, in fact, the budget speech really doesn't pay a lot of attention to all of the numbers. Right? It really is trying to formulate a communication methodology to tell the country, this is where I am, this is where I need to be. And a lot of effort goes in to the production of that budget and that budget speech. And that budget speech invariably there'll be a draft which is written. The authors will remain silent for the purposes of this meeting. And then you kind of craft it back looking, well, what do my numbers say? What is the biggest thing in the idea? What messages can I tell them with regard to the rate of growth in the economy, what people have to look forward to? And the real purpose of the budget speech is really a message of hope.
Yes,
right?
yes.
This is what government is doing, and therefore this is what we need the country to do. Now, the difficulty now, and we've been in this difficulty, you could consider literally all of the 60 years of our independence has been an exercise in how do we build an economy. And at various times, we've relied on different things, but the country has gone through at least 3 recessions. the post-independence period, which ended up in 1970, was a period of recession. A period of expansion took place in 1974 with the oil and gas finds on the East Coast. And then that ended around 1986. Actually, the signal started in 84. And so it was a kind of slow decline until 86, then the prices just fell off. And then we went into a period of depression, and we tried new things. That's when VAT was introduced, the removal of, the reduction in terms, first there was an increase in foreign exchange restrictions, and then in 1993, we threw the EC1 and EC0 out of the window, and we went to a free floating market rate, really a crawling peg, if you will. And then we kind of the economy started to grow. Budget by 1990 was about what? $11 billion. And by then we went into a boom starting around 1999 with the export of natural gas and the economy, and then our budgets were up to 2008, 2009, 2010, which is the Patrick Mann administration, of which I would have been a part. The budgeted revenue number was up somewhere between was $35 billion, and then we had a huge year in 2008 when the prices spiked on the international market, and we had $53 billion, and we put about $15 billion. We took $15 billion out of the system, just took it out, and we put it in the Heritage and Stabilization Fund, the Infrastructure Development Fund, and the Consolidated Fund, right? And the idea being, well, we're not going to spend that. So the budget number was 53, but the real expenditure was somewhere around 37. Right? The difference went towards $5 billion went in the Infrastructure Development Fund, another $5.7 billion went into the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. It was the biggest injection into the Heritage and Stabilization Fund in any single year. And then about another $2 or $3 billion went into the Consolidated Fund. That would have been sort of the residual tax revenue that came in that we hadn't budgeted for, we hadn't planned, because prices of natural gas went from $2-something to $13 on the North American market. Yeah. And that's where we got a huge input. And after that, well, there was the 2008-2009 financial crisis, so the international economy got a little soft and wobbly. Prices recovered in 2011, 2012, and continued until 2014. And then we had a decline, sharp decline. So from 2014, 2015, the revenue has been under pressure. And then there came COVID. So the first break, really, in terms of the revenue situation took place in 2021 and 2022, right, from 2016. So we had 16 years of depression where the economy declined in real terms. And what we've done, the nominal value of GDP, and people always get confused with nominal real value. It means that adjusted for inflation, we are probably operating on about 2018 income, right? So that's what the number says. Debt to GDP ratio, because we were running deficits over that period, the debt to GDP ratio went up just about 90%. And you have to make 90% is the number that is used for international purposes by the IMF. It reflects central government debt as well as what is debt which is guaranteed by the central government. So when Mr. Imbert, for example, comes up with VAT bonds and so on, those would fall out of the calculation because they're really a way of understating the expenditure position, right? And that's one of the reasons why we find ourselves in a situation where the refunds due to the private sector is about $6 billion. Right? And that probably is part of the problem with our foreign exchange position, but that's another story. Right. So the reality is that the minister right now is in a difficult position. And you have to look at, one thing that you have to pay attention to will be what has happened in the petrochemical sector. And in the petrochemical sector, the international prices have fallen from a high of $1,500 a ton for ammonia. We're this second largest exporter, not producer, second largest exporter of ammonia in the world. Russia is number 1, we are number 2. And that's because the largest producer of ammonia in the world is probably China. But it doesn't export. It uses everything that they produce. So they produce more ammonia than anybody else, but they use all of it domestically. In our case, we export ammonia and we re-import fertilizer. And that's because we're in the wrong end of the business. All right? That's another story.
I tell you what, Mr. Brown, we're going to have to take a quick break here. But we thank Mr. Brown actually for that. That was education. So we're going to take a break. And when we return, Derek and I are going to actually have face-to-face conversations further with Mr. Brown. So we'll be right back after this.
Let the home store turn your house into a home you love. Get everything you need to give your home that special look and feel. We offer household items, lawn and garden, paint center, hardware, plumbing, lighting and electrical, toys and storage solutions. 5 convenient locations: 6th Avenue Barataria, The Falls at West Mall, Pennywise Plaza Shoguanas, C3 Center Branch and C3 San Fernando. Check out our Facebook page for more information and come visit us today. The Home Store. Turn your house into a home you love.
You gave us the inspiration to be first. We gave you the solutions that put you first. You walked with us side by side, and we continued to serve you with pride. First Citizens celebrates with you 30 years of achieving dreams, shaping success stories, and painting brighter futures together. And together, we'll accomplish so much more. First Citizens, together, 30 and beyond.
Maybe he landed here totally by coincidence. But if by chance he's admiring your fresh coat of Benjamin Moore soft sky blue, well, that's a pretty high compliment. Coming from an expert.
From Maracas Bay to Arafita Avenue and Piaco, Richard's Bake and Shark brings the world's most popular fish sandwich closer to you. Open daily at all our locations.
Fan Zone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
Welcome back to AM Prime, ladies and gentlemen, education and information, and that is precisely what we're getting this morning as Mariano Brown joins Derek Ramsmooge and I on set. Derek, a lot has been said, but great information shared, historical context, taking a look at the situation that we're in, where we were, but also, as Mr. Brown concluded, the Minister of Finance finds himself in a very difficult situation currently.
First of all, thank you very much. Thank you, former Minister Brown, or Mr. Brown as I
Mariano is fine.
Or Mariano, excellent, thank you. You began a very good conversation of the historical context of how we arrived where we are today. The average family, however, while they may appreciate history, is more concerned over my next 24 months of how am I going to survive. And how are we going to come out of this distressing situation? As you mentioned off air, you best describe this economy as an economy in distress. I want to add, because the economy may be in distress, a number of families may have a very stressful time. If you were in the hot seat, how would you basically begin this conversation of dealing with this economic stress that we're about to embark upon, or we have embarked upon without knowing?
We're in it.
Yes.
We didn't embark upon it, we're in the middle of it.
We're in the middle of it. How would we now manage to bring some sort of comfort to families or the economy?
Well, I mean, and that's what the budget speech talks about or tries to do. But this is the reality. In 2015, the last budget year, which had been before a change in administrations, the total expenditure by the then UNC government would have been about $60 billion. All right? Last year, the budget was about, well, the year ended 30th of September, the total expenditure was approximately $57 billion. They may have gone over that by a bit. All right? Let's assume that. But $57 billion in 2023 is not the same as $60 billion in 2015.
Right.
It means that you could buy a lot less because of inflation and so on.
Your purchasing power.
Your purchasing power is a lot less. So that in real terms, we're really operating with an income which is in a sense frozen in time or declining, because inflation has been going up, but the top line has not been going up. So in those situations, you can consider yourself as a householder that your income has remained either stable or declined, say about in real terms by about 7%. Right? That's just a number, right? 7 to 10%. But your needs are continue to rise. The children are getting older. The cost of repairs around the house, food has gone up and so on. So you have the same envelope, but the kind of things that you want to stick in the envelope are getting bigger. Now, so that means that you have to make some choices. What can I do without? What can I do less of? What can I do to maintain my standard of living by making some adjustments? And that's difficult. So, and that's where as much as the people may have a bad view or the negative view of the IMF report indicates and recognizes that this is a difficulty that the government will face, and recognizes that social expenditures are important, transfers. And in fact, if you look at the government's budget profile over the last 8 years, you would find that whilst many things have been cut, transfers and subsidies, a percentage of the budget has remained large.
So if you look at our economy, even from the 1956 to present day, this workfare state we have, while we recognize there's a social agenda to it, by now as a nation, should we not have found a way to transform ourselves to wean off that level of dependency?
The answer to that is yes. But
how do we do that?
Well, we failed because we've depended upon one sector, which is capital intensive, meaning that you use a lot of money in that sector to generate a job. One job is millions, whereas in what you will call the middle economy, you're talking about thousands. So there's a big difference. So what has happened is that we've grown the revenue, but we've not grown the employment generating capacity.
So in terms of every year we've had budgets presented.
Correct.
But we have yet to bring about a budget that will stimulate growth per se, not statistical growth, but new jobs, fresh money, so to speak, within the economy.
And on the same token, the world has changed.
Yes.
So you will find, for example, that a lot of my friends in economics at the university, I call them friends very loosely, they keep talking about manufacturing. Trinidad and Tobago will have a comparative advantage in certain aspects of manufacturing. The petrochemical sector, well, you know what that is.
Yes.
And the real issue regarding the petrochemical sector is the petrochemical sector can grow because there's not enough gas. Right? So all the projects they used to have on the table presumed more gas.
Yes.
So we have a technological problem, transitioning away from what is the energy supply. Trinidad and Tobago has enough energy. The difficulty now is the price at which that energy comes to the private sector and to householders. And the trends are for that to rise, which makes life a lot more difficult. Now, what are the other things that we concentrate on in terms of distribution, growth, manufacturing that moves us forward? The reality is, even the largest economy in the world, the percentage of that economy towards manufacturing is 29%. That's China. And China is manufacturer to the world. So what becomes important is what you would consider to be the non-manufacturing sector, non-energy manufacturing sector, as well as retail distribution and everything else. So we have to start changing our business model in terms of what we do.
And as you talk about that, in a post-COVID Ukraine war scenario, where supply sides are a major factor in our economic development, and the whole world is going towards, for example, the AI sector. And you look at how the Chinese have developed their economy, you look at the crisis they are facing in the housing industry, the fear of certain economic booms collapsing. So how do we use this opportunity, or can we use this opportunity to begin a different economic pathway?
Well, I mean, you have no choice. That's the point. It's not whether you could use it or not. You have to use it because things are changing and you have to adjust to the way the world changes. So you have to adjust to the way you do business. And that has to do with the adoption of digitalization, the adoption of artificial intelligence as very much part and parcel of the way we do business, to make the country more efficient, to make government more efficient. All of those things have to happen as you transition to what is called a blue or greener type economy. Now that requires investment dollars. But that also, one of our problems moving forward from the point of view in terms of overall economic growth is that the population growth has now started, well, it's now started, has started declining, it's been declining for the last 20 years, right, since about the year 2000. So that has made life difficult because the number of younger people coming into the market is starting to trend downwards. So that productivity is even more important at this stage of the game for that part of that transition. And we have to get the country to understand that our working lives are going to be longer.
And I'm glad you brought that up because of the following. For the Trinidad and Tobago population born in the year 2000, and now part of the Gen Z population as we approach 2025, being 25 years old. And as you look at the restructuring of pensions or the retirement age from 60, 65 to 70 in the first world, the new perspective of work, what work is supposed to look like, where the jobs are coming from, that whole new private sector perspective, because for too long we've been traders. We buy and we sell commodities, and that has eaten away part of our US dollars and our consumerism. However, how do we now take this younger population, create jobs that they can stay in our space and earn foreign currency?
Well, the one thing that we have to realize is that governments, everybody thinks about government and government revenue. Government doesn't generate any revenue on its own. What government does is tax people who are earning income. So government really takes taxes income and redistributes it. And there's that redistributive element in a sense that has led to a certain loss of dynamism. So the real effort at this stage is to talk about how do we get Gen Z to start thinking of new ways in which to generate income. Now that has to come from the private sector. Government is really, in large measure, I mean, literally everything you do, you have a license. So, for example, for you to have a station, you have to have a license. And have a marriage license, right? You have to have a license to drive a car. Almost everything requires some kind of license. If you're running a restaurant, you're doing X, Y, and Z, you have to do something. So the way we do work has to change. Government has to become more efficient. And what also is going to happen in the long run, government also has to get smaller. Right now, that is not something that the politicians like to tell the public, but that's the reality. The government has to get smaller and has to have less people to do the same amount of work. What has to happen on the other side, and this is what has to take place, is that the private sector has to get bigger. Right? The private sector has to get bigger, and has to get bigger by taking on some of the same types of services. Now, the structure of Trinidad and Tobago is not going to be any different to any other country anywhere in the world. We're not any worse off in that regard. Right? And that's why I'm saying that there's been a false distinction by concentrating on the manufacturing sector. The bottom line is that we are never going to be able to compete. Are we going to compete with a country like China? It's at 1.4 billion. Are we going to compete with India? So you will always have relative strengths to markets which are close to you. Right? And the relative strength with those markets, for example, is we never really sought to see how we could take on Latin America. But some of the new firms who have been expanding outwards. So, for example, take Bermudez, take SM Jalil, take Associated Brands. You have to consider them. Take, Bermudez, the Bermudez group before. Well, look at what they have done in terms of their expansion. Right? You will find that Bermudez has grown in the domestic market, but they've also grown across markets, literally from here to Latin America. Right? Associated Brands has done the same thing. SMGL has done the same thing. Right? You can get those type of products. SMGL's product. I mean, SMGL has a plant in South Africa.
Right. So, see, part of the problem, we've heard the Minister of Finance saying he wants to review the taxation framework for oil and gas. But equally, I think we now need to review the taxation policy or the benefit structure or the incentives you offer for certain companies to expand into new markets.
In terms of the domestic market, yes.
As well as startup capital for the younger generation who wants to basically get into the AI or any other new type of, for example, the music industry, which is also big. So can this present government, when I say present government, I'm not talking about the PNM administration.
No,
we're talking about government on a whole, or the government of Trinidad and Tobago. Can we restructure, as you say, the role of the state and how the state, sheds the economic dead weight that is around it?
Well, I mean, if you look at North America has exported its culture. Right? So manufacturing in North American culture is now, what, 20%, 22% of GDP, compared to China, 30. Right? It's probably more like about 19 or less. Right? But if you look at what happens, they export entertainment. Entertainment is a big thing. You pointed out music, the X, Y, and Z, and so on. Netflix is in everybody's room. That's the internet, the value of the internet. So literally, I could deliver a product which is not tangible. It's not a tangible good or service you're buying. It's not what you want. But what this does is give you access to everything in real terms. Right? So that's really where Gen Z has to be. That's the market in which you have to operate. Because the same way it gives metropolitan countries an advantage, it gives you an advantage. Because you don't need the same quantum of investment. And you would find that the changes that have taken, there are changes in taste patterns that are taking place in metropolitan countries too. There's immigration to the metropolitan countries also creates a reverse effect for imports of a different kind, which means that you can export your country, which is to do with services, music, entertainment, those other kinds of stuff. Right? There's been a growth in terms of world music and a recognition of the cultures. So it's an opportunity. Now the real issue is, how do we get the younger generation to buy it? Because they have to do it.
Yes, they are the drivers of the new economy.
They have to do it, yes.
And as you mentioned, basically different cultures, we have to also recognize that there's a shift or shifting of culture with respect of the influence of Venezuela and its population in this country and in the workspaces, like I say, the food industry, for example. And many of them have certain skill sets. We have a skill component of the Venezuelan population here that we not properly taken economic advantage. Politically incorrect here, but economic advantage.
In real terms, we lost an opportunity. Right? When a country of 30 million people next door to you will have a much wider range of skill sets that you would have. Bound to. Right? Just because it's broader, bigger, the country is what you call it. You're going to have a broader range of skill sets. Now, when they ran into their economic problems, and this is what happens all over the world, that's one of the reasons why we have migration across the world, because different countries are in different stages of development, and some of the climate change has been affecting some countries worse than others, and if there's instability. So people migrate. And where do they migrate to? They migrate to where there's income. So that's one of the reasons why the boats are crossing the Mediterranean from Africa. Right? So same thing with regard to Trinidad. Now the issue is, how do we use that to our advantage? And quite frankly, we lost an opportunity. Right? Because we've never structured who we would take or what we would take or put any priorities on it. Right? It wasn't proactive, it became very defensive. People are coming. Well, the answer is that you ought to have embraced the opportunity from the beginning. Right? And Trinidad, and most people don't recognize that Trinidad has always been a safe haven for Venezuela. Right?
The historic relationship goes for centuries.
Well, and some of the major families in Trinidad and Tobago, some wealthy families in Trinidad and Tobago, for example, right? Whilst they may have French Creole names, somewhere in their ancestry is a Venezuelan.
So
in my case, for example, my mother was Venezuelan.
There we go.
And they have a lot of people.
But you have been incorporated in this society as a founding point of economic thinking and direction. So the question is, with all the human resource capacity, and it may still continue to flow, how do we become proactive as opposed to reactive in even managing our human resource direction?
Well, and that's where the opportunity is there, precisely because Trinidad and Tobago's population has been declining. Right? You have had an opportunity, in a sense, to compensate for that. Immigrants, America has grown on the basis of migration. Australia has grown on the basis of immigration. New Zealand, Australia, New Zealand, Canada. You could think of those economies that have actually embraced immigration.
So how do we therefore create a culture of entrepreneurship? Because the migrant population, basically, they have gone out and created their own jobs and the cottage industries.
Well, that's the point. You don't have to create it. They will create it.
They will create it, but how do you create the framework that makes them?
That's the issue, right? And that really is what has stymied us so far, is a lack of, I have to say, a lack of intelligent thought, right? Because this is an opportunity which has to be sold to the rest of the population. What the population sees, and many parts of the population see them as interlopers, competitors. They come in to take something from us. That's the normal reaction of the foreigner, of the local to the foreigner. So, for example, that basically is the problem with Europe.
But how is that any different from the big oil and gas companies coming in, bringing their hired staff to go and drill and everything else that goes with it? Or the number, not anti-American, but the number of American interests in our oil and gas industry?
Well, it's something we've struggled with for literally all of our independence. Right? I go back to the example of my mother. My mother was orphaned in Trinidad and Tobago as a child. Right? Grew up here in large measure, went back to Venezuela. Most of the family went back to Venezuela, but she came back to Trinidad and stayed here. The three girls stayed here. But my mother died at age 88. She was never accepted as a citizen. She was always given residency status, but there was never any way for, the government or the immigration officials never saw it possible to make her a citizen. Now, you consider that, for example, to the North American structure. As much as they talk about illegal immigration, they will find a way to make you a citizen. In fact, it's better if you become a citizen. You want to be part of
it. And you pay taxes.
And you pay taxes and do everything. That's why you bring them in. Right now, so it's a mindset. It really is a thought process. You have to find a way to see the opportunity. But if you're blinded to the opportunity, you never see anything as a possibility.
So how do we break our insularity in thinking? Because our economies are becoming more and more intertwined. They always have been intertwined, but we need to accept certain realities now in creating a new economy, because we cannot continue the same path that we've had for the last 60 years.
No, we can't. And interestingly enough, and this is where I think Eric has been undervalued. The two things that happened on independence is that Spanish and French were made fundamental parts of the curriculum. And the reason why it was made a fundamental part of the secondary school's curriculum, because it was always anticipated that we would need to interact with non-English speaking countries as a way of expanding our economy. But we thought of it from the point of view of a subject that we did at school.
Yes.
Not understanding the importance of that subject about communication. The most important part of doing business, or in fact, selling, is about communication. How I relate to you, how we converse, and we have to be able to speak one another's language. So we've done it. Ideationally, the governments have always understood that we can't depend on ourselves. We have to look outwards.
But understanding the foreign business culture, because from where you are right now, in terms of your skill sets, is understanding the business culture. The business culture, forgive me, is not about the doubles culture or the shack and bake culture anymore, right? It is about, if you look at the fast food, they are reapers and these, you have different fast food coming into it.
But Trinidad and Tobago's entire food structure is a result of immigration, right? Everything that we do is, all of our foods that we eat are what you were, in a sense, imported from that perspective. It's
So
the
if-
result of the cultural exchange.
We cannot continue repeating stability, 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 and nothing about growth.
Growth.
And on that point, I think my co-host
Yes.
is indicating to me.
Yes, that's exactly what it is. This was a host dream this morning when you have such a vibrant conversation. And I want to thank Mr. Brown for joining us this morning, sir.
Is it done?
Yes, unfortunately, time has come to.
Time runs away from you when you're having fun.
But, sir, thank you very much for your time this morning. And I should say this isn't the end of the conversation. This is just part one, with further, more extensive conversations to come. Thank you very much, sir.
Well, thank you for your time.
Yes. Derek, thank you very much. It's good seeing you once more. And we're looking forward to the continuance of this series tomorrow morning.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown, for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for your time, too.
Ladies and gentlemen, we now break for WSN's News. This is WESN's News. Thank you for joining us. Here are the headlines. President Kangaloo calls for national focus on Tobago's autonomy. Fun Splash Water Park owner highlights limitations of lifeguards in tragic drowning incident. A 33-year-old man is held with a homemade shotgun in Mearu. And in international news, mutilated remains of up to a dozen people are dumped in Mexico's business city. With the details, I'm Keaton Shaw. The President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, Her Excellency Christine Carla Kangaloo, addressed the Assembly at the Assembly Legislature in Scarborough. Prior to her address, the President received THA's Chief Secretary, Farley Augustine, at the villas at Stonehaven. She expressed, in this pivotal moment in our nation's history, it becomes imperative to place Tobago's autonomy at the forefront of our national agenda. Her Excellency said she is of the firm belief that the country must now engage in a comprehensive re-evaluation of the issue of Tobago's autonomy. She affirmed, going on to state that she perceives this as the opportune time for a definitive legislative effort aimed at granting autonomy to Tobago. Vijay Ramai, owner of Fun Splash Water Park, commented that having lifeguards doesn't always guarantee saving lives in emergencies. This statement comes in the wake of the tragic drowning of a 5-year-old Damari Jeffrey at the water park on Sunday. Ramayo pointed out that even at locations with lifeguards on duty, unfortunate incidents have occurred. In contrast, Damari's family expressed the belief that if lifeguards had been present at the water park, his life might have been spared. In a news report, Ramay clarified, saying the water park has signs posted around its pool areas explicitly stating the absence of lifeguards. He said they don't have lifeguards, they have pool attendants. Damari drowned during a birthday celebration for his 2-year-old cousin, Shemaiah Gooding, a 33-year-old man who was allegedly held on Tuesday morning with a homemade shotgun and 1 round of ammunition is currently being questioned by police. The suspect, an unemployed man from Newlands village, Guayaguayari in Mearu, was held by officers attached to the Mearu Criminal Investigations Department and Task Force, led by Acting Sergeant Mohammed, during a firearm eradication exercise. During the period between 9 a.m. and 12:30 p.m. on September 26th, police officers executed the exercise at a garden camp in Newlands village, Guayaguayari, where they allegedly found a homemade shotgun and 1 round of 12-gauge cartridge. The lone occupant was not authorized to have the weapons in his possession. He is facing possession of firearm and possession of ammunition charges. In international news, the mutilated remains of up to a dozen people were found strewn across the northern Mexican city of Monterrey on Tuesday. Messages left with the remains suggest the victims were killed as part of a purge within a gang. Monterrey is the industrial and business capital of Mexico and the seat of many large companies. The discovery of the dismembered bodies at 7 separate sites across Monterey came after a drop in the level of violence in recent years. Local media said that next to the remains found were signs referring to attempts to infiltrate a cartel. That's WESN's news. Thanks for joining us. I'm Keeson Shah. Join us again at the top of the hour.
We exposed 5 strangers to KFC's delicious chicken to see if any time could be KFC time. And at the first bite, the party began. We repeated the experiment during the day, during business hours, on weekends, with sunshine, with rain. And it's confirmed. KFC's flavor makes anytime KFC time. KFC, it's finger licking good.
Imtiaz, what station is this? I don't watch TV. Me too.
Join me, Dr. Nalini Kokram, on What's Up Doc, where we discuss all your burning questions concerning health.
Trinidad and Tobago is among one of the highest risk group of patients that develop this form of genetic breast cancer.
What I'd like to take home from a short interview like this, screening. You must screen.
Because it's silent.
It's silent.
Yeah.
And because it's silent, you don't know it's there.
What's Up Doc, every Tuesday and Thursday on WESN, Content Capital.
Welcome back to AM Prime, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for staying with us this morning. After such an insightful conversation, an extensive conversation with Mariano Brown and Derek Ramsmooge, we now continue with what's taking place here in Trinidad and Tobago. We're focusing on fisheries this morning as the European Commission issued Trinidad and Tobago with a red card. It's a term used for TNT being a non-cooperating country in the fight against illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing. There is a legal framework as per the IUU from the European Union, and unfortunately Trinidad and Tobago, well, has more or less been non-compliant. Precisely what does it mean? Well, there is the possibility that our fish exports to the European Union, that might be banned. Well, to expand a bit more on this conversation, I'm joined this morning by 2 guests, actually. The first is the Corporate Secretary of the Fishermen and Friends of the Sea, Mr. Gary Aboud, and he's with us via Zoom, as well as Mr. Imtiaz Khan. He is the President of the Carly Fishing Association. Gentlemen, good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning. Thank you.
Morning.
Mr. Aboud, I would start the conversation by simply asking, as a Corporate Secretary of Fishermen and Friends of the Sea, in 2016, Trinidad and Tobago was dealt a yellow card. That has been a period of about 7 years. It seems as though, well, not seems as though, it's now been stated that TNT has not complied with the legal framework. We've been issued a red card. Precisely what does this mean for the fishing industry of Trinidad and Tobago?
The nice thing about talking on radio is that I have to tailor my comment so that it's not too honest, because people generally don't like the truth. So even if I tell the truth, I have to decorate it in a nice dress, put on makeup and make it look acceptable. But the bottom line is that the fishery sector is not an affluent sector. We don't have any millionaires or any billionaires in the sector. It's a grassroots sector consisting of maybe 50 to 100,000 full-time and part-time people. And the economic gains for the country is food stability, supply of protein and nutrients, and deliciousness, fresh, harvested from nothing. It's not like a chicken farm where you have to feed the chicken and have to use foreign exchange to buy the feed and then harvest the chicken. It's a harvest industry. So when something like this happens, it affects tens of thousands of livelihoods, and it's very disappointing. I know the minister is a lovely guy. I mean, we couldn't hope for a nicer person as a minister. And the junior minister, Avinash, is a gentleman and sincere. But sincerity does not make efficiency. And lack of efficiency causes poverty. And so the government must and should really be scrambling, but they're not. And they should be bowing their heads in shame for gross incompetence, delinquency, delinquent conduct, negligence, and misappropriation of public funds. So I know that, I mean, it's difficult to maintain my friendships when I say these things, but it's always better to me to be politely honest. So you don't want to hear the real version. Let's just say that was the polite version. Imtiaz, I don't know what.
Mr. Khan, sticking with the polite version, I mean, as president of the Calibi Fishing Association, how is this now going to impact upon your business as well as other fishermen and their businesses throughout TNT?
Well, for those who export, I really don't know. As Gary said, being polite, I just like to be honest. And if the truth, well, you're offended anyway, well, I'm sorry about that. But to be truthful, certain things was supposed to happen, and it didn't, because the authorities, they don't think of us as fishers as important. During this time, I think fishers was given any sort of importance was like in the COVID, they say, well, to be patriotic, and the fisher folks, they continue to fish to ensure that the government, that the people of the country was fed, and after that, we were rewarded with, high gas price and stuff. So, in terms of the government working to help this sector grow, or that we will have sustainable fisheries and stuff, well, we see what's happening here. Being red carded is just saying that, yeah, you're not doing what you're supposed to. Plain and simple. And we now will fall victim for the, international impact, the impact it will have on all the fishers. So, it's something new to me, because being yellow carded and then being red carded, I play a little football, so I know a little about being yellow carded and red carded in sports. But in terms of fishing and from an international point of view, this is like real new to me, and the more I start to read about it and start to understand it, is like, wow. I was talking to a guy who normally export like fish, but they say they normally export to the US and Canada, right? Not to Europe. And this is one of the reasons why they don't export to Europe, is because of we don't have a proper port infrastructure. So you can't blame fishermen for this, so which means this government is not doing what they ought to. So, improve the sector.
Mr. Khan, I want to ask a question, and I'm asking it in a very polite way. I mean no offense. But given all the difficulties associated with what fishermen face, there's so many issues that I can touch on: national security, the price of fuel, now this with in regard to exports to the European Union. How do fishermen continue to stay in an industry which is, in a most polite way, neglecting them?
Yeah. And we had a couple of meetings with Gary and myself and a couple of the stakeholders, and those are some of the things that came up. How? Because it's about survival, and I always say you don't hear fishermen complaining or being asking for stuff before all this fuel. All we asked for was proper security at sea, which is a fundamental human right stated in our constitution. Life, liberty, security, to enjoy your property. You invest in a vessel, you like to fish, you go to fish, you take care of your family without criminals, throwing you overboard and killing you. Then the increase in the fuel, just like that, without consultation. Hey, you're not getting this regular gas again, you have to pay super, and now the cost of fuel triple from 2018 for the fisher folks. So, and then fishing gear is continue going up astronomically. Cost of engine, and I sometimes, I wonder myself, honestly, because we're trying to come up with some plans in terms of how this industry how we're going to go forward in this industry and have a good quality of life for the fisher folks and their family, and all who involved.
Mr. Aboud, coming back to taking a look at the response from the Ministry of Trade and Industry, they said that it is important to highlight that only 0.022% of Trinidad and Tobago's fisheries exports are destined to the European Union. Furthermore, when total trade is considered, fishing exports to the European Union amount for only 0.00007% of TNT's trade with that region. And they said that they will still, the Ministry of Trade and Industry is seeking to enhance market access to the EU. What do you make of this response from the Ministry of Trade and Industry?
Well, in Nigeria, you have more relaxed laws when it comes to child labor. Does it make child labor right? In Sri Lanka, rape is not considered a punishable offense. It's an entitlement. So I don't know, it's difficult to say, but let me answer your question directly. Trinidad and Tobago is one of 2 countries on planet Earth that currently have a red card in fishing. One designation brands an entire population and an entire nation, and the issues that the EU raise are responsible, credible issues that we support. We cannot sustain the fishery unless it is properly regulated with reasonable and smart laws. We have no law. So from 1917, we have the oldest law managing fisheries on planet Earth. When this beloved government got in, our beloved PNM got in, the first thing they did is send home 93% of all of the staff of the fisheries division. So we have no fisheries management. So thirdly, a lot of fish products are exported to Europe via the USA. You have secondary importers that are moving cargo. Fourthly, the fisheries in Trinidad and Tobago are suffering from what I would call catching babies, catching future catch. So we are actually not only destroying our catch for tomorrow for Trinidad and Tobago, but because we are a hub, we're like a taxi hub for fish. They come here and they meet and they hang out and then they go somewhere else. And when they come here and we catch them using all sorts of manner of fishing gear at any season of the year, when they're spawning or when they're mating, something is wrong with that. Something is wrong with catching unborn babies and destroying next year's catch for the entire CARICOM. With great respect to the CARICOM, if we had a functioning CARICOM, they would red card Trinidad and Tobago, because all of the species that they catch up in the north come here to spawn. So when we wipe them out, we are screwing up the fishery up north. So for me, I mean, I don't know how you feel, but I feel embarrassed. If I were a diplomat at the United Nations, or if Trinidad and our beloved Prime Minister had any respect for our flag, you should be embarrassed that we are one of the 2 countries in the world red carded. And go back and look, it's not very often. Normally when you get a yellow card, it doesn't last sometimes 3 months to 56 months. That's the maximum. We have broken the world record for maintaining a yellow card and doing nothing about it. And my last comment is that although we are in a hurry to have a fisheries division that is regulated and that is properly managed so that our men can find their way in the world, we do not support the manner in which the government is currently conducting its affairs. Every time, we have been representing fisheries now for 27 years, back when Riza Mohammed was minister. He first started public-private partnership in co-management of the fishery. It was disbanded when Mr. Manning, God rest his soul, rest in peace, disbanded it. He came into power and he said, none of that, get rid of them, send them home. In other words, we cannot co-manage and have an input in the management of the fishery. When Kamala came into power, she didn't put it back in. And Rowley, certainly he's not putting it. So we are locked out from having an input or a say as to what happens. But I lost my point in theirs. I was making a point, but I lost it. But the long and short is that when the past governments were in power, we were consulted on the draft legislation. And each time they brought it to us, it came back a little more, to be polite, a little more retarded. You know, like they would say that they would charge a fisherman $50,000 US if he didn't have his license in his pocket on a commercial vessel. And the captain would have to pay $300,000 US, do 2 years in prison, and lose his boat. And it would not be any committee, co-partnered committee like how you have the labor board with 3 judges from different sectors. It's nothing like that. It's the director of fisheries have full authority. And if the minister wants to change the law, he may or may not. In other words, it sets up a mini dictatorship for the management of a critical supplier of our food, our fishery. So, so they had consultation. And each time there was consultation, the law changed dramatically and came back to us more retarded than before. So if a fisherman is caught on the sea without a license, he have to pay $200,000. Well, we don't fish. We fish in simple vessels. We don't take a license on the sea. There's no dry place on a vessel. But we support the idea that fishermen should have a license, but it should be done in a way that is compatible and empowering. So now that they brought back the law now, the last time we were consulted was 2017. All we said is just show us the law. Consult us before you rush it into Parliament. The Attorney General has had it for 3 months, and they wouldn't share it with us. So is it a democracy or a dictatorship? And should we just bow down? Nowadays, all we're doing is asking, show it to us. Just show us. And we will comment. We want law, but not law that is written in a closet. It's not right.
Mr. Khan, coming to you for a moment, Mr. Abu just emphasized that the fishermen do not have any sort of say or input in regards to the management of fisheries or even in regards to the regulations and laws. But given that the EU has stated that TNT is a non-cooperating country in the fight against illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing, how much responsibility actually lays on fishermen to ensure that their fishing They're fishing in a sensible manner. They're fishing also in a sustainable manner.
Okay. Let me break down this for you. You know, in our country, in like Trinidad, our waters end at 200 miles nautical miles from our land, right? I think that is where our waters end. So the fishing they're talking about is where they have these international vessels coming in and fishing our waters and catching our fish and taking it out. Now, for things like this not to happen, you need to have proper working Coast Guard to guard your borders, to patrol your waters. You know the issues we've been having in terms of securing our borders. Even right here, in the small basin here in the Gulf, between us and Venezuela, 7 miles of water from us between here and there. And we can't even secure that. So you know, it's greater than the fish, saying the fisherman have poor methods in terms of fishing, because, you know, all these laws we bring in is really about enforcement. If the people who are going to enforce these laws to regulate the fishing, to ensure that we have sustainable fishing, if you don't have the necessary plan, infrastructure in place, you know, you're going to be red carded. Simple. If you don't have a proper port for the people who do the international fishing to do the transaction, you know how it is. So is most of the things we are red carded for is from a government point of view, where they are not applying, you know, the regulations, they're not implementing the regulations, they're not doing things as they ought to. So it's because, you know, they started doing some data work, and they're talking about a minority, 10% that the big vessels catching majority of this fish. These small vessels that we are talking about currently, the pirogues that these fishermen use in the Gulf of Paria and around Trinidad, do to catch that volume of fish, because right now they are struggling to cover the expense of $1,500 and $1,800 to take care of the family. Whereas before, that same $1,500 or $1,800 before the gas price, they could have lived with that. But right now, as we speak, that is the cost to cover the expense. So they have to go looking for more fish. They can't even come home, you know, as they can't fish as they used to. And with the security risk, it make it even harder. So this is where we really at in terms of that. And you know, the first thing I want to blame is the fisherman, but there are so much other factors that add to what's happening in the industry. As I say, it's very complex. It has so much things that need to be working right to ensure that we have sustainable fisheries. You know, the fisherman is just one of it.
Mr. Khan, as we're nearing the end of this particular conversation, there's so many hopes that fishermen have, and in other industries as well, as it relates to agriculture, food security, and sustainability. There's so many hopes. But what do you suppose is the next step in trying to rectify this situation? Is it just a matter of having that legal framework finally implemented, or is it more than that?
No. We're very scared at the way. Let me tell you something. What was promised to us? We had a meeting with the minister, with the director of fisheries, and the line minister. It was said in that meeting, we're going to have this document by the 7th of September so we could go through it, so we could be part of the process, right? That didn't happen. Now we're being red carded. I understand they say it's going to be laid in Parliament tomorrow. One of our issues is that the director of fisheries and the minister, the power they carry, right? You know, they say they will pass the law and then they will consult with us. And we're not for that. We're not for that, because when law is passed, you know who are the people that suffer? The poor, law-abiding people. They come like, you know, why am I scared? What I'm scared of? Look, a simple thing. The license. If a fisherman do have the license, he could be charged. Now, we see what's happening in Trinidad in terms of law enforcement. The law-abiding citizens are the ones who are being targeted, because the poor people don't want to get in trouble. They will pay whatever fine if they could. So they're pushing us into a place where, you know, it is like in this country, it's looking like being a law-abiding citizen is the wrong thing. That's what they're pushing us, because now if they implement the law as is, or they pass it and they say, well, okay, it's law now, you know what they can do, the fisherman? Because I see fishermen, the fishing like in front of the port, and these people call the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard will come and take them up to Stibbles Bay. And if we call the Coast Guard in distress, we wouldn't get any response. So we see the law working for the big business and not for the small man. So there's no equity. So I'm very concerned the way this bill is tabled and the way they are going about it, and we've been shut out. I'm very concerned what will be happening in terms of this law. I mean, we have a lot of concerns. And there's so much I could raise that, time won't permit, but there's quite a lot, and I'm very concerned.
Mr. Aboud, your concluding statements in regard to this entire situation, the points that has been raised by yourself and Mr. Khan this morning.
We had a prime minister, you coined the term creeping dictatorship. If there ever was a creeping dictatorship, it's now, because we in fact support the idea that we need law, and we need regulations that are workable and sensible, and we need an empowered regulatory body, a fisheries division that is part of us. What we don't need is anybody to come with a big stick who doesn't know the first ABC of surviving on the sea, and who threatens to beat us, lock us up, remove our license, charge us money for our license. They're talking about, I'll give you, in the Maritime Act is at the same time tomorrow being laid in Parliament. And in that act, they have on page 1 that it's very important that they pass this law because they have to protect the walrus and the seal. So, I mean, with great respect, the writers in the ministry suffer from a kind of mental displacement, I would say retardation, because we have never seen a seal or a walrus in Trinidad and Tobago. So they had 5 consultations. You have to remember that. You see, they come into the public and saying we had consultations, but they're going into political strongholds where people have political biases. I'm wearing yellow today, but I should have worn red because people will think that I'm yellow, and Imtiaz have a yellow wall in the back, so they'll think we are, but we are not politically motivated nor aligned. It's just a coincidence that we both wear yellow, but I should have worn red because we're not political. So you can't have consultations and invite only political strongholds of Labre and Tuco. That's not representative, and we are not motivated. And you should consult everybody. Each time they have consultations, it's biased, and certain people are being invited. And when I talk to the director of fisheries, she say, yeah, well, we have certain people that we consult with. But who selected those people? Why didn't you advertise it and properly bring everybody? And every time that they hold consultations, and the last time we were consulted in 2017, the document had changed for the worse after we were consulted in 2013. So each time you consult us, you make it worse. So how are we supposed to trust you to take it to Parliament? I want to say that being red-carded is an international embarrassment. And the only reason why international diplomats have respect for Trinidad and Tobago is because we are on the last throes of the limited and failing oil and gas sector. So only for that money can we hold our head up a little bit. But oil and gas is running out, and the era of having to protect and develop sustainable resources for all people has arrived. So the government must sit up. The good ministers, Avinash is a great guy, the senior minister, these are lovely, lovely people, but being lovely is not what wins Fishermen and Friends and the Carly Bay and Claxton Bay and San Fernando Fishing Associations and the Tobago members. We're not into the loyalty, we're into the efficiency, sustainability, protect our men from bandits on the sea, protect us from illegal, unregulated fishing, protect our species, protect our livelihoods, and protect Trinidad and Tobago's food source, there's nobody working in the fisheries division. So even if they pass this law, they're just doing it as a pappy show for the EU because there's nobody in the government working. They sent home everybody. When the PNM got into power, they sent home 90% of the staff. It's as if to say, we're not interested in them grassroots people. Forget about them. Send home everybody. And they did it. So even if they pass the law, they're making a mockery of the European Union and a mockery of the international communities who are promoting sustainability. We need better. We need better. We are here. I mean, we could have had 100 different representatives. We have 82 landing sites, and everybody has a right to be consulted. So when they come to us in 2021, they came to us and asked us about this maritime law and said, well, hold on. You can't ask us. We have 82 sites. You have people all over the country that have an entitlement to be consulted. We will restrain our comments until we can have proper national consultation. So they didn't consult us.
Well, Mr. Boot, unfortunately, that's where we're going to have to wrap things up. I want to thank you.
I hope it was good.
Yes.
I hope it was good for you all. Imtiaz, thank you for coming. And
Mr. Boot, Mr. Khan, thank you very much for joining us this morning on AM Prime.
Thanks for having us.
Well,
thank you.
Following the presentation of the bill tomorrow, there will have to be follow-up conversations with Mr. Boot as well as Mr. Khan. In the meantime, strap yourselves in and let's see what happens along this ride that we call national development. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Keaton Shaw. Thank you very much for joining me this morning on AM Prime. Wishing you all the very best in your day ahead. May it be a productive one, may it be a safe one. Should things go well, and we certainly hope they do. We'll see you again tomorrow morning as I'm joined by Derek Ramsamuj for continuance of the conversation surrounding the national budget for fiscal year 2023-2024. But until then, keep well.
WESN